From Paratopia, where love is the thing. Paratopia. Love is the thing today, for we have back with us on the program one Barbara Threecrow, whose latest book is Return of the Sacred Feminine and Teachings of the Grandmothers. I recommend you go pick that up directly from Barbara at www.barbara3crow.com, where she runs her own little online store. So without further ado, Barbara Threecrow. Paratopia, please welcome back to the show, a very froggy, if lovely, Barbara Threecrow. Barbara, thank you for coming back.
Thanks.
Yeah, and
Yes.
And thanks for giving us an update on the Kogi. I feel like, now that we're just a few episodes away from the end of this first phase of our show, it's like I want to tie up all the loose ends, like the ending of Lost or something. I
That's
feel like
right.
This was a huge one. So thank you for coming back.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be back talking with you and to give an update on what's happening in the heart of the world. Yeah, with the ancient people there, the Kogi.
So you actually flew out there shortly after our last interview, and I'm not going to remember the gentleman's last name, but Rick
Harlow.
Rick Harlow, okay, we're working on a documentary for the Kogi, with the Kogi. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The documentary was specific to the journey, which was called the Linea Negra, which is the journey around the Black Line, which was very significant ceremony for these people, for the indigenous people there. And the documentary was filmed of all of that process, and it will be used for their archives for their coming generations to teach, and there will be portions of that documentary that will be also shown to the public.
Now, remind us how you came to be involved in this and how this sort of unfolded.
Well, it's quite amazing how spirit works, and I was invited last August, 2009, August, to Pasto in Colombia, where I had been actually going there for the last 5 years to teach and do ceremony. And I was invited to an indigenous gathering there. And during that time, the Kogi and elders of the other three pueblos in the heart of the world, the Arhuaco and the Wiwa, were also there. And in the serendipitous way Spirit set us up, I had met these elders, and we had a very significant meeting, and they asked myself and Rick Harlow, who was with me, if we would help them to fulfill this very important and ancient ceremony, which was this journey around the base of the heart of the world. So we agreed. We talked about it because it's quite a daunting. It's quite daunting what they needed to do, but we felt so strongly that we wanted to help them because we understood upon speaking with them, because they are the caretakers of the heart of the world, and their sacred works represent all of us, all people and all of life. So we wanted to support them with the ceremony as best we could. So we formed the Elders Project to raise funds to help them.
And what did you expect to be doing when you arrived there, and then what really unfolded? Was it what you expected? Was it more?
Well, I've learned in my life, be careful of your expectations, of course. My journey there was quite profound. I went to the heart of the world, and I met Rick there. He was there during the journey, and I came at the end of the journey and met the elders, and we proceeded up to the heart of the world, way up into the mountains, to one of the pueblos of the Arhuaco people. And it was, for me, like traveling back in time. It was very far into the mountains by foot, a 6-hour journey first in a Land Rover over terrain that when approaching certain areas you couldn't imagine getting through, but we did. And then after a period of time we had to leave the Land Rover and continue on foot up into the mountains. Arriving there, we spent pretty much a whole day in ceremony to purify ourselves in order to take part, or actually even enter the pueblo with the people there. So that was quite an experience.
Mm-hmm. Are people in those communities or tribes, are they suspicious of outsiders? Are they welcoming? Because I know in the documentary we see them sort of blocking off the bridge when the documentary crew leaves and saying, "Don't come back," pretty much.
Right. Yes. When we spent several weeks with them, and during the period of time we were there, we were told that over years they've had many people come there to promise them things or offer help, and they never see them again. And I think they've certainly become very discouraged and disillusioned about outsiders. Mostly it seems that people come there as some sort of an adventure, and or just maybe to claim that they've gone there into the heart of the world and met an ancient people. So these kinds of outsiders coming in there constantly offering and never coming back or never fulfilling their offers have been very discouraging. And so, yes, I think that the people are very, wary and, and suspicious, and they sort of really observe you very, very deeply, and it's unnerving in a way.
And so at what point did you realize that you were going to be sort of, I don't know, accepted enough to be helping out with ceremony and all of that? Did you know that ahead of time, or was that something that you had to sort of be vetted for on their terms when you were there?
Well, we didn't really know what we were going to be taking part in. We felt that we were just going to continue the documentary. And because they had gone on the sacred journey to the 54 sacred sites, the process of that was enormous, in that what they do is they go to the highest points in the sierras, which are the snow-capped places, and they gather sacred implements or elements, which they know what these are. They could be stones or various plant materials, and they carry them all the way to the ocean, and they place them in the ocean, and these are called pagamentos, or spiritual offerings. And it's a journey of prayer and communion with the elemental world and the Mother Earth, and their complete process is one of being in prayer, walking a prayer, you might say. And while they would travel to the 54 sacred sites, they would be gathering various elements to then take them back up to the mountain, to the highest points, back again. So it's sort of an exchange of energies, let's say, of very vital elements from both sources, to exchange them for the purpose of balance and harmonizing. So when we went to the high points in the Pueblo, they had already gathered thousands of shells. I'd never seen anything quite like this. It was very stunning and touching. They had gathered at the ocean literally thousands of various kinds of shells and seeds and stones, all hand-picked not just randomly, but with a significant knowledge of what each one of these elements represent. That's the kind of knowledge that they hold. And they would then cart them all the way back up into the mountains. So when we arrived, they were waiting for us, and unbeknownst to us, they proceeded, after we spent a day of purifying ourselves, by the way, then they proceeded with their ceremony, working with these thousands of shells and stones and seed pods and various things that they had gathered. And for days, we sat with them in silence while they worked with these elements and prayed over them and cleared them and whatever they had to do. So that was, to me, so it touched me so deeply to realize this dedication and their way of life in relationship to the earth and their balancing and harmony that they work with. And what I felt, you asked the question of what showed me that we were welcome and accepted was, I guess it was several days in when I was asked by one of the mamas, Mama Sekukwe, he was the elder, the 94-year elder, that this journey was specifically to help him to go on this journey. Mama Norberto, his name is. He asked us, myself and Rick, to prepare some of the pagamentos, and they would be offered to the highest points in the mountain along with the others. So that was, to me, that was sort of a point where we were embraced and accepted into the process of this.
Do you have any sense of how long a journey it is from the village to the top of a mountain to the ocean back to the village? I mean, we're talking days, weeks, hours?
Yes, we're talking days. And in this time, some of that journey can be made with jeeps, because that's what we had to do, because there were so many elders that we, were going on this journey, and it was 300 miles around the base of the Sierra Nevadas, the heart of the world, to go to these sacred sites, and then to the ocean, and then back up to the high points of the mountains. So in times past, these kinds of journeys were completely done on foot, and it would be weeks before they would be complete. But this kind of journey that they went on, that we supported, hadn't been done in many, many years to this extent. So this was quite monumental in having this take place.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very, I just want to say that they were so deeply touched and grateful for the help that they received. And I really want to share that with your listeners, because perhaps some of your listeners may have found their way to my site and may have offered some donation to help the Kogi.
And when you say that you had to purify yourself, what was that process?
Well, first of all, we were given these little threads. They weave there, so that's part of the process of men and women working together. They make their own weavings, and they gave us 4 threads in one hand, 4 threads in another hand, and guided us to hold these and focus on releasing and giving into these little threads first all the energies from the outside world that we had carried there, to give over that, to let it go, to release it. And the next process was to release all the foods, plastic, water bottles, and whatever else that we had brought up to the mountain, to release any energies that may have been attached to these. And the next process was for our own body to let go of and release any residual anxiety, fear, worry, anything negative. And the last procedure was we had to travel all the way down the mountain again to a pool of water. It's actually a river, and to go into this certain area that they consider as a very sacred pool and immerse ourselves completely in the waters, which were quite cold.
Yeah. Huh. Wow.
Yes. And then we came all the way back up the mountain, and then they began their ceremony, the process with these elements. And so it was quite an all-day process.
And how long were you there?
I was there for a couple of weeks.
So when last we spoke on the air about this, you'd said that there was some sort of debate amongst the mamas in regards to whether it's even worth keeping on the guardianship and the trying to do something in the face of what is clearly a coming storm. Is there any resolution to that? I mean, is that why this was so important and they had this huge gathering to do this in the first place? Is this sort of their way of saying we're still in this till the end?
I believe, yes. I think that it had been determined by some of the traditional mamos. Mamo meaning holy people or seers or shamans. It's spelled Mamo, and that means that they are of the sun people, or of the sun. But they're they're seers, and they do divinations, and they have the capability to really go deeply into the parallel realms, unknown realms, the place they call the Aluna, which is where they commune with other beings. And these particular mamas had determined that it is not up to them to determine that it's too late or that we've gone beyond help. That's up to the greater beings, the Creator, to determine that, and that they, the people there, the Kogi and the Arhuaco and the Wiwa, have been given this position or job, if you want to call it, to do these sacred works, for which they have been doing literally for centuries. And they say that they have been in the heart of the world since the time when the gods lived on the earth, and they have been in communion with them, the various beings, since that time. So I think, yes, I believe that this continuation of this journey is in alignment with their trust and faith, which is quite deep and strong, and something that I really realized we need to come to this point of that trust and faith in our relationship to align with these elders in that way.
You mentioned the three tribes. Were they all one giant community at one point, and they split up, or were they three sort of autonomous groups that came to the original instruction on their own? Do you happen to know that?
Well, they were originally, before the Spanish came, there was a great civilization called the Teorana, and they actually found the what they call the lost city in the jungles in the Sierra Nevadas, which no one really knew was there. So it had been uncovered or discovered, let's say, and during that period of time, that was when Alan Herrera was there. He's the videographer for National Geographic that actually finally made contact with the Kogi after centuries of their hiding in the Sierras, and people didn't know that they existed. And during that period of time in the 90s was when the lost city of the Teorana was actually discovered. So they were of one people. And when the Spanish came, they were, quite affected on many levels. Many of them were massacred. Their sacred items were taken and some things destroyed, but many of the people just fled. And who the Kogi are today are some of those people that had disappeared. And the Arhuaco are sort of, we might say, if you look at a huge, a mountain, a tall mountain, in the most remote, highest places is where the Kogis fled to. And in the middle areas of the mountains is where the Arhuaco are. And then the Wiwa. And then further down the mountain, at the base, remained what is the Conquarmo, who really, through these centuries, have lost their law of origins due to westernization and religious intrusions. And now they're trying to reinstate the four pueblos together because of their law of origins and the sacred works that they are all meant to do together in order to harmonize and balance all of life.
Here's what I'm trying to figure out. The law of origins and the sacred works, talking about this area as the heart of the world, and we discussed, other sacred sites being correlates to other body parts. But just the fact that there are these sacred energy sites around the world, then does that mean that the indigenous peoples in those parts, either now if they're still there or at one time, also had the same set of instructions, that they all worked together even if they didn't know each other, separated by distance in the world?
Yes, and I think that's pretty fantastic. To me, that's part of the great mystery that the indigenous people speak about, is that there was some level of communication, like, for instance, the Kogi going into the Aluna, where they commune with other beings and so on, that there is a collective consciousness that is very prevalent in ancient cultures throughout the whole world. And yes, there are sacred sites in different parts of indigenous areas where they also would go to perform ceremonies and leave offerings, and pretty much along the same lines as the Kogi. Yeah.
So do they ever contact other humans through the Aluna? Would the Lakota, for instance, be aware of the Aluna? Do they also function in that?
I have a feeling that that's true. For instance, I might say, you might look at the Hopi. I know the Hopi have this capability, and I believe that that's a possibility, a very strong possibility. Yes.
And did you get any more insight into what the Aluna is, or how it is that they function in there?
Well,
did they bring you into the Aluna?
They didn't bring me into the Aluna, but I feel like I think that some of us travel to a place. We may not call it the Aluna, but I think it is a similar or maybe the same place, out-of-body journeys or realms where we experience certain things or meet beings that are quite profound. I think it's a similar experience. I think it's a parallel realm, or a realm that appears within where they are, or they enter into a parallel realm. I think it exists, a continuing existence, present always, and so one has to place themselves in a certain frame of mind energetically in order to travel there. It's sort of like, you might say, a process that we learn to commune with others. And sometimes it's random, because we often may think of someone, for instance, and then they call us and they say, I was thinking of you. And, there are things going on in our realm and our capabilities that we really haven't fully tapped into. And I think these elders, these ancient ones, they have that. That's their life. They they have lived that. And most indigenous peoples in the in the long ago did that, and some of them still do, like the Kogi and the Arhuaco, and I believe some Hopi people.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have on people like Dean Radin who do psi research and talk about quantum entanglement, and it gets into sort of oneness. We're all one energy, and so that maybe psychic abilities happen when we're tapped into the oneness energy as opposed to separate matter, particles. But it sounds like the Aluna is a place. It sounds like it's not just tapping into oneness, but that there's actually a realm there. Is that correct?
Well, that's a very good question, and I can't really answer that. I can only surmise in response to your question, what is that, specifically, what does that appear when you say a place? I mean, it's not a planet, it's not a room, it's some sphere or some energy or some...
The ether, something along those lines?
Yes, you might say the ether. I think that, for instance, I know for sure these elders have been communing with some of us, and to some who have never even met them, but sort of have heard about them, or have been very drawn to find out about these people. And I've been looking at that, and what I realize is that the elders, the mamas, had said that recently, and I can't give any kind of a date or time on this, but they said recently, their journeys into the Aluna, they have realized that there are not as many beings or others within this realm as there had once been, that they would commune with or teach or discern, or maybe they counsel, and they were in a way alarmed about this, and so in my thinking and I sense that they are reaching out in that realm, whatever you want to say, the Aluna, that realm, reaching out to all of humanity, to engage them, to teach them, because they say that they want to teach us, the younger brothers, how to care and do the harmonizing of the mother.
And how did you speak to them? Did you have a translator? Did you learn their language?
Well, I do have a translator, and that's Spanish. So there's their language that has to be translated into Spanish and then into English. It's quite a process. I've not yet learned Spanish. I can sort of understand and pick up a lot, but I can't have very long conversations. I can more understand what's being said rather than have, express myself. So I have to have a translator, yeah.
Well, so it's hard to tell how authentic a translation is, but when I saw the BBC documentary, it sounded like they were trying to be as faithful to the language as they knew how. And you could just tell that by the words that they would leave out of sentences in the translation that would be common words in English.
Right.
But it sounded like they were incredibly rational, well thought out, philosophical by nature. Not that they were trying, not like I would do, but that's how they raise their children to be. Do you find that? Do you find them to have a handle on the rational world and to have either, I don't want to say rejected it, but just not gone that way because that would put them out of balance in some sense, as opposed to, in other words, the thing we've been sort of dealing with on this show for the past few episodes has been whether or not indigenous mind or heart exists parallel to Western rational hierarchical mind. And so they're separate but parallel, or if the rational mind is a bastardization, is a misstep out of indigenous mind. if that makes sense to you, what I just said, I hope it does.
Well,
What's your thought, having actually spent time with them?
I think it certainly may appear that way. I think that may be something really to investigate. I am a great believer in the Western civilization being brainwashed, and for many centuries, and being, of course, induced and also insulated into a certain form of thinking and belief system that isn't in alignment with indigenous ways at all. And of course, indigenous ways are about harmonizing and about respect and recognizing the earth as a living being. If you could imagine all humans understanding this, how would we be functioning then? I mean, and this is the way the indigenous people function, with that realization, with that knowledge, and that's the way they live their whole life.
Right.
At least these ancient people, because they have not been westernized, brainwashed by the religions. And so I think that there is something going on here that has sort of hidden or removed our true nature.
Right. I want to just sort of drive this point home, if it is the correct point to make, that because my point in mentioning that they seem so rational in their conversation there in that documentary is that they could completely comprehend and understand Western rational, suit and tie discussion, but we could not completely understand what they're talking about. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's why they call us the younger brothers.
Right.
Because we are like children. And we have a lot to learn, and yet what we're learning is tainted by, well, let's say, corporate greed and an agenda, a hidden agenda. So, yes, I think that, and I think that they very well understand, they've come to comprehend through the destruction that they see happening to the earth, because that this is incomprehensible to them. So to Western society, it's very acceptable and typical, and no one could really. People can't wrap their minds around, well, how would we function without electricity now, or the iPod now? How could we even do that? I mean, technology is good, but I think it's been used to do more harm than good, and I think technology is a gift from the beings, from the star beings. But in fact, it's been manipulated and used by those who are basically manipulated themselves by the greedy energies, the dark energies.
Well, in fact, they talk about that too, right? I mean, how literal are they when they say that there are sorcerers sort of being like puppet masters and trying to manipulate and control humanity? Is that a metaphor for something else, or do they literally mean that there are sorcerers sitting somewhere, in a meditative state, or however that works, trying to manipulate us?
Let me share with you. I did speak with you about this, but I'd like to share it again in relation to these energies, these sorcerers. And I think that they are very well aware of this, and I think we have to keep exploring this. But the only thing I can come to, well, it might not be logic, but logically, in the limited experience or knowledge that I have with this, because I have to go into it more deeply to receive more guidance, but everything has been created, as you know. All of creation is as it is meant to be, and that includes the dark, the light, positive, negative. There are those energies that are great challengers for us. They are great teachers for us, and they often appear as a very dark energy. It's that, as well as the light, those energies of the light, and they all appear as teachers. But for myself, I recently had an experience where I was taken into, maybe it was the Aluna, because I was really communing with the beings, the extraterrestrial beings, because I had been gifted this piece of Moldavite, which I understood came directly from the extraterrestrial realms, and its purpose is basically enlightenment and advancement. And because I just recently returned from spending those weeks with the Mamos and the people in the heart of the world, I was very deep in that, still being held deeply in that experience of the depth of their relationship and their commitment and the works that they do. I was still really deeply held in that, and I felt upon my return, of course, I'm always asking for how can we, and myself, of course, too, be more effective to help the greater whole, to help the issues, to what we're all dealing with and what's frightening us to death here, and the encroachment of this this despairing demise that everybody's talking about. And I was taken that night into this place where it was a very barren, dark, ominous landscape. And I was standing there, and before me, a little way off, were these robed or cloaked, hooded figures. And I rapidly went towards them energetically. I went right up to them to see who these were. What was this? Who was this? And I looked inside the hoods, and there was complete blackness, complete darkness. And I realized that these were the sorcerers. And I shifted back into my physical self, standing there, and immediately dropped into a place of empowerment and invoking, and I became almost a sorceress myself, if you want to call it. I was like, if I had had a staff or a wand, I would have had a beam of light on the end of it, and I would have been calling in the powers of light and the powers of health and well-being and all the gods and beings and the angels, and I was in the throes of this, and I was calling upon all that I could come into, that I could grasp, that would call towards me and the world, those beings, those powers, those angels, to bring light and harmony against these sorcerers who were standing there. Very, very, they were dark and ominous and still but powerful. And so I was doing this work because I had asked before I went to sleep, what can I do? Show me and guide me to be more effective. And I think we have to be careful what we pray for because I was put in this position. Although there was no hesitation, I just began. And when I ended, this energy, these energies of these dark sorcerers, I heard them in my mind, and they said, you cannot ever eliminate us. You cannot ever dispel us. But you are holding us at bay. But we are incrementally moving towards the windows of opportunity. And the windows of opportunity are the humans that are in fear and doubt, who are greedy, who are hateful. Those are our windows of opportunity that we look to enter into. And that, to me, was very, very powerful. It showed me the level of work that these elders may very well be engaging in themselves, as these sorcerers are entities. They had the cloaks on, these robes on, and hooded cloaks, because they were showing themselves to me. Otherwise, there was nothing there. Mm-hmm. Just a dark energy.
How did this unfold? Was it a dream? Were you meditating?
Well, I have a way that I go places in the dream time. And how that is I often work with sacred stones, This particular stone, as I said, was a moldavite, or sometimes I guess it's called a tektite. And I engage with the spirit of that element before I go to sleep. And as I'm going to sleep, I'm communing with this spirit of this element, and I'm communing with it in the way that I need to be guided or receive answers. And as you're drifting off to sleep, you have to hold this communion with this element. And then you are transported, which happened. I was transported. So it wasn't necessarily a dream. It's different than a dream. It's a place that I was taken to, like I said, and perhaps this is what the Aluna may be like, you know. It's not a dream, and one can tell the difference.
Right.
You know, when you have, I call them waking dreams or telling dreams. It's sort of like, well, this really wasn't a dream. This was a vision, or this was an actual happening. Something actually was real. You know?
Well, did this happen before you would fall asleep? Is this something that would be the first thing that happens when you shut your eyes?
Yes, as you're going to sleep, you have to go into sleep,
Right.
but you have to hold this focus and communion in order to get there, in order for them to take you. Because your mind will disrupt. If you start thinking about other things, your intention is disrupted. And that's a practice that we can all do, is to learn how to receive guidance and write information or relation or to travel to different places, to go to people, to go other places. This is a practice that is available to everyone.
Is this something where dreamlike things have ever happened, or is it always as delineated as that?
Yes, it's always that way. I mean, I have communed to find a missing boy. I have gone to travel to persons that I want to communicate with. Various things like that.
And does it always work for you? Do you always end up there, wherever there is?
It always works for me if I hold my focus, intention, and communion as I'm drifting into sleep. If my mind starts chatterboxing, it's disruptive, and it won't happen. It's sort of like a parallel realm. When I used to put myself in a semi-meditative sleep. It's almost like the place I call in between waking and sleeping, where you're not really awake, but you're not really asleep either. It's sort of a gateway or an in-between doorway of realms, different realms, where then I would begin to have a communication and ask for certain things or guidance, or just be there, and things would appear, beings would appear, or information would appear. But initially, I would have a question to receive information, and I would get the exact thing that I needed.
That's fascinating to me, because we don't normally hear sort of the mechanics of that. We always hear people talk about what happened to them, but I was never clear before. Is that a dream? Is that someone meditating? I mean, me with my weird meditation energy thing. Well, I've been sort of letting it go pretty much nightly and somewhat daily. And at night, if I sit, I usually am sitting on the floor in front of the couch,
right,
legs crossed. And Jeff and I have discussed this. There's sometimes when your eyes are shut, the blackness sort of that's normally there becomes this expanse. I mean,
yes.
It becomes another dimension to it.
Right.
Well, I'm now bringing that out into the room. So somehow my surroundings become that interior, what was an interior domain.
Right.
And I'm manipulating energies in it, moving around in it, and it's thick and all of this. And I don't understand all of what's going on there, but it's certainly fascinating.
You can do this. You can...
Is that related to what you're talking about?
Well, yes, I mean, because you can do what I'm talking about without going into a deep sleep. It's just that I happen to use that one of those particular ways, and that's just one. And the other one is just not going to a deep sleep, but holding yourself in that half awake, half asleep place. Those are two different processes.
Right.
And when you're meditating, you can reach into those deep places also. And there are different areas. If you focus with your eyes closed, as you're speaking about, you focus on the blackness, the black expanse before you. But if you engage your focus in the different parts of that field,
mm-hmm.
in other words, not just looking straight ahead and going into that dark field, but let's say if you look up to the point, your eyes are closed, but you're looking at that dark field, but now you shift your vision, although your eyes are closed, to the top of your forehead, like it was like you're looking out of your third eye, for instance. Mm-hmm. Something different will appear. And also you'll have your eyes closed, you'll see the dark field in front of you, but then you can also close that off, and something else will appear.
Hmm.
So, and you can, as you're sitting there and you become into that deep place, you can put your physical, let's see, how can I describe this? See, this is difficult because the language that we have, it limits us, but you can step behind or move yourself behind, outside of your physical self as you're sitting there meditating. And then you are behind your physical self, and you become just like a clear or hollow vessel. And you can then be taken over by a channel or a being to become a trance, in a trance that would be another being or entity speaking through you.
Right. Is that dangerous?
Only if you don't set it up first, so that you are only aligning with and calling in only those that are of the light and in relation to the highest, the most good for all. I mean, this is something that we have capabilities of, and that is an awareness that we must have first about the power that we really truly have. Because, yes, you can be susceptible to anything, like those sorcerers that are looking for windows of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting. Jeff and I don't know if we talked about this or not, but we did a magic mushroom experiment for the show.
Uh-huh.
And when you take that magic mushroom journey, if you take enough of it, you go through, you see these sort of bright, colorful symbols and patterns, things like that with your eyes closed. I mean, this is sort of like the beginning stages, the onset of this trip. And just this afternoon, I let said meditation energy go, and it ended up basically lying me down on the couch and doing a bunch of sort of gestures over my face, but ultimately pushing up on the inside of my eyelid, like up into my brow.
Yeah.
Really hard. And, you see light from your retina, and, if you just push on your eye, you see, like, weird light and stuff. But this was not that. This was exactly the mushroom trip. This was coordinated, colorful, multicolored symbols coming at you like what are those called?
Kaleidoscope?
Like a kaleidoscope, yeah.
Yep.
And so I wonder if what this meditation energy didn't just show me is that whatever the mushroom activates in you, that's where it's located, in the body.
Yes.
But I don't know. I just find it fascinating that we've got all of these things that I can just sort of putz around with, haphazardly that we just take for granted, or we just say, oh, that's, nonsense or whatever. But there are people who know how to use those things as actual, I don't know if you want to call them tools or if you want to call them states of mind that are necessary if you're going to be living a holistic lifestyle. I don't know. However you want to call it.
Well, I think they are tools, and I think they're very ancient tools, and I think that they are available, but we don't take them seriously. I think there are some that may take them seriously, but I think that we don't take the time to make this a practice to really go deeply and fully into this gift, because I believe it is a gift. And for instance, another experience I had something happening where I had some kind of a constant infection, or something was going on inside of my nose, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and I was doctoring it with Neosporin or all kinds of stuff, and it wouldn't go away. So I'm not one to run to the doctors. So I do my own doctoring, but I also commune with my body to find out. I listen to what's happening, and it gives me a lot of information. And I used one of the sacred stones that I work with and asked the spirit of that stone, which, again, as I was falling off to sleep, I asked the question. I asked to be guided what this was, to show me what this was. And it actually took me 3 nights of this process before I finally, in a very deep sleep, because I had gone off into a very deep sleep, and I heard this voice call out to me very strongly and told me what this was, and it woke me up. And okay, so that was my answer, and in fact, the only way that I could heal this was to go to a doctor and get antibiotics, which I did, and it went away. So it's a practice, and these are tools that we can use to help ourselves in many, many areas and aspects of our lives, but we don't really take them seriously or continue with them or believe fully in these. And if we believe fully in something, we're dedicated to it, you see. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between, for instance, the Kogi going into the Aluna. There's no question. What I realized when I was there, I was observing and absorbing. And at one point, Mama Roberto was making some music. There were turtle shells that these young boys were working with to make music, and he was making singing and drumming. And they were calling for rain. The skies were completely clear and blue. It was hot. And the drumming and singing and went on and on and on. And we were just sitting there, and the day was, going on. And suddenly, way over in the distance, I noticed these huge thunderheads starting to peek out behind the mountains. And I noticed this, and of course, I started looking around. The wind started coming up. I started looking around at the people there in the pueblo, and no one was jumping around or saying, "Oh, look, it's working. Oh, the rain spirits are coming." And it really struck me very strongly the difference between their culture and Western culture, and how they don't even question that is this going to work. They know that they're communing with the spirits. They know that the spirits will respond. And the difference in our culture is, everybody says, "Oh, look, we are being answered. Look, the spirits are listening." And but behind that is a doubt.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was normal conversation for you like there with them? Did you talk about any of these things that you're talking about with me that went on with you? Did they give you any advice? Did you have non-spiritual discussions? What was sort of day-to-day activity?
Well, the whole time we were there, pretty much they were working with these elements, the thousands of shells and stones, and so we were a part of that, in that we were making some of the pagamentos with some of these elements, and mostly the process was watching this. They told us no one from the outside has ever seen this ceremony. So that was a very special privilege that we were invited to take part in and to observe for all that period of time. Mm-hmm. That was very, very special. And, they are very worried about the waters. The waters there are drying up, and the snows are leaving the high peaks, and they're very worried. And on the journey, some of the sacred sites that they have gone to for centuries, but they haven't been to in about, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years. Now they had difficulty getting to these because some of them are on private property now, and they were not allowed. Even when they asked the owners of the property, they were denied entrance. Some of the places near the ocean, one of the most sacred sites is this rock formation right at the ocean. And by the way, if people go to my site, Threecrow.com, they can see a lot of these photos of the journey and of the elders. So this rock, beautiful, unusual, sacred area where these rocks were in this film, it just breaks your heart because as they approach this area right at the edge of the ocean where these sacred formations were, now what sits on these stones on their sacred site is a big cement building. And I have to tell you, watching the looks on their faces, it was very sad. And a lot of the sites, there were other areas, other stone formations that were filled with graffiti. Some of the water sources coming off the mountain that are very, very sacred, very, very essential for the Mother Earth's life as the water is, were filled with garbage and were trickling. And one of the elders said 40 years ago, now that would be the last time that they were there, 40 years ago, this was a flowing waterway. Now look there's no water here. So, and they are saying that there's going to come a time when the waters will, be drying up more and more. And what are we going to do? How will we live without water? And but yet they continue on but they are asking us, all of the younger brothers, they're asking us to help them. And with that, I formed what I call the Harmonizing the Earth meditation community, where regularly people come and we lay out a formation of crystals and water and seeds and various elements. As they do themselves, they work with all of these elements. And we do a meditation with an intention of harmonizing and healing the waters and all of life. And everyone that comes is receiving amazing things, messages and a sense of peace, even joy. I mean, people are it's really quite amazing. So we are not only receiving, we're also, in our intention and the love from our heart and our desire to bring healing and help to the Mother Earth, we are receiving so much. And I believe that energetically and vibrationally, these elements, the crystals, for instance, and the waters and the garnets, these are all, as you know, they're broadcasters of energy. They do their work. They're in constant process. But when you work with them yourself and impart your intention, your heartfelt intention, that's what they receive and emanate that, and that moves out into the world. So people can do this themselves if they feel frustrated or if they feel disheartened or frightened about what's going on. These are things that they can do. And in a way, what we're doing is we're supporting the works of the Kogi people and other indigenous people who are praying for the healing and harmonizing of the earth.
Yeah. It's funny because I think in our cartoonish thinking about indigenous people, we think like, well, they must pray to their gods, gee, what did we possibly do to deserve this? But in reality, they know it's us, don't they?
They do. They surely do. And, it's amazing because they said the one elder who spoke on the film, the Elder Brothers' message, he said, we're not angry, or we don't hate the younger brothers. We're not angry at the younger brothers. We know they're like children, and they're just doing as they please, and they don't really understand, and he said they want us to wake up. They want us to know. They want us to understand. And what they really want us to understand is the capabilities that we do have to make a difference. That's what I truly believe, because they know they can make a difference. But now they said that it's gotten, the intensity of what's happening is so huge that they are having difficulties and they need our help.
Mm-hmm. Well, Barbara Threecrow, thank you again for taking me down a notch. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for coming on and sharing your insights and sharing a bit of yourself as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that we're going to be continuing with the Elders Project because the journey around the black line around the base of the heart of the world, according to their law of origins, must take place 4 times a year. And the next one, people can connect to my website, and it will be put on there.
Okay, and what can people do to help out?
If they want to send a donation, it is a non-for-profit, and it's the Elders Project. It can be sent, a check to the Elders Project can be sent to Earth Action, care of the Elders Project, P.O. Box 63, Amherst, Amherst, Massachusetts, 01004.
Very good. Well, once again, Barbara, thanks for coming on the show and sharing with us and seeing us off into the next phase of Paratopia.
Thank you so much, and good luck to you in your next part of the journey.
Thank you.
This is Jason Offit, author of Darkness Walks, The Shadow People Among Us, and you're listening to Paratopia.
Hey, this is Stacy.
This is Wes.
Be sure to check us out on the Black Fridays podcast,
where we explore the esoteric one conversation at a time.
You can check us out at www.theblackfridays.net. It's a little bit freaky.
And we will see you there.
If you record audio for any purpose, chances are you want it to be heard. You want to attract the largest audience possible who can hear your message. That's where we come in. We're CyberEars.com, a revolutionary internet service that will host your audio files and help you promote and track its popularity. Considering hosting a podcast to the world? We have all the automated tools to make the process as simple and easy as it can be. No technical mumbo-jumbo to work out. CyberEars.com does all the work for you. You record it, we take care of the rest. So don't delay. Go to CyberEars.com today and register for a free trial account. Upload your audio files and get heard. With CyberEars.com, it's your audio on your terms.
Radio, the endeavor for esoteric research and investigation into the enigmatic. Eerie Radio is a weekly podcast that features interviews with the world's leading paranormal researchers. Download episodes of Eerie Radio from your favorite podcatcher or directly from the show website at www.eerieradio.com. Eerie Radio. Listen, learn, laugh.
Paratopia, I sat in the park the other day and I tried to write an article for UFO Magazine, and I just couldn't do it. I ended up writing this instead, and I will share it now with you because I don't know what else to do with it. Occam's razor states that the simplest answer is usually the real answer. When it comes to the ufological and the paranormal, it's hard to tell which simplest answer to go with. Usually there are several, including a question that rarely, if ever, gets the serious scrutiny it deserves. That question is this: do things like personal psychological filters and cultural overlay inform and distort perception, or are they the tools by which one perceives it all? What are we, and how do we perceive, are questions we need to ask prior to asking, what is the paranormal or alien? What happens when we don't ask first questions first? Ufology. This field sucks. There are shining stars in the field illuminating what it could be, decent researchers and organizations, but even they must hide their hands, so to speak, because that's what it takes to appear credible when confronted by skeptics, politicians, and TV personalities on the mainstream news stage. Sure, you can fake it for a while like the disclosure movement, but your motives and credentials eventually catch up with you. When that happens, the critics rightly shred you, and the UFO community whines that you've set them back in the mainstream. As if everyone was just about to take this seriously, but now they'll roll their eyes and move on. Since this is always what happens, I submit to you that it's the way it works. That whole scenario playing on a loop is ufology. A major part of it, anyway. George Hansen chalks this up to his favorite catch-all, the trickster. He's not wrong. There is a set of trickster patterns that have been plaguing humanity since Western mind divorced itself from indigenous heart. Perhaps all of the larger frustrations we assume are human nature are actually the necessary evils of living a lie. Living, that is, in self-imposed exile from source. We call this evolution. It's all part of the lie. So we're liars. All of us trapped in the rationalist hierarchy of our own manufacture. Could use a rewrite, probably. Or a conclusion, or something. But I think I've learned a little something from the Tiokasin Ghost Horse interview straight up through Barbara Threecrow. I won't go so far as to say that we've learned anything about the paranormal here, but I think I've certainly learned something about human consciousness, and it especially piecing together Tiokasin Ghost Horse with George Hansen. It seems that this whole Western rational hierarchical mind that believes it is evolving up and out of indigenous heart is not an evolution. It's actually just what naturally occurs when overpopulation happens. You get a large population, and then you have to have these sorts of hierarchical rational structures in thought and then in buildings, essentially, for that society to sustain itself. Now, how that break occurs, how we get out of balance within ourselves to overpopulate, is its own mystery. Maybe it has to do with location. Perhaps people who live in, deserts necessarily are going to be out of balance because there's less food available, so you have to produce more children to make things work. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing at that. But the fundamental point for me is that you have, in human consciousness, at the healthy base, indigenous heart, thinking coming from the heart, which is informed by rationality, and certainly that's a part of it, but it's not the thing that demands all of the attention and rules and structures and all this sort of stuff, to be moral and, all of that type of stuff is completely unnecessary. All of the religious stuff is completely unnecessary when you come from the heart, because you don't need to be told how to be a moral person and to act accordingly. And in fact, telling people that and putting down rules and laws and structures about that is a form of repression. It's to keep and maintain the rational hierarchical mindset, which, of course, the spiritual person poo-poos and says, we need to break away from that, break away from the ego and all of that. But if you do that, then society crumbles. You see the dilemma? We've built this society. We call it evolution, and it will crumble if we don't continue to do that. And while I think that's what needs to happen, ultimately, to get back to health, the health of the species, I'm the marginal person telling you that, right? So therefore, it's not going to happen unless everyone decides to be marginal for some reason. I mean, there's got to be some sort of outside force that moves us, if it's going to happen at a species-wide level. Otherwise, it's as Krishnamurti said, it's an individual process. And interestingly, I wanted our final guest next week to be Peter Kingsley, who I think is the first person that I've read since Krishnamurti who completely, absolutely gets it. That indefinable it. And so we've had a lot of great, personal phone conversations lately, and he was going to be our final guest, but he had an unfortunate emergency that is taking him away from this, so we'll have to get back with him later in the year. But one of the things that he had said to me on the phone was, because, I maintain that in order for there to be a quote-unquote spiritual upgrade, there needs to be a species dieback. There needs to be population control, essentially. And he said, why? Why is that? And I don't think I could articulate it well, but since putting together Teokas and Ghost Horse with George Hansen, I think I can. I think it's as simple as what we just said, which is that the rational structures aren't going to go away because they are completely necessary to maintain the global society that we've built up. And so individuals can, quote-unquote, gain enlightenment, or however you want to put that, pop out of the matrix, but they will always be few and far between because the structure is not set up for that. And the structure doesn't have to be there. The structure was a misstep. It might have been a misstep that always happens, but it's a misstep. And that misstep is it's like having two operating systems. You've got Mac and you've got Windows, right? Mac would be, let's say Mac is indigenous or enlightenment. These are sort of synonymous terms. And Windows is rational, hierarchical mind. So you've got these two operating systems, and in order for one to kick in the species, the structures that support the other have to go away. And so that's only going to happen when something wakes us up or shocks us, some sort of cataclysm. And indigenous mind can only maintain itself because indigenous mind is balance. It can only maintain itself in balanced population. Like, once everything is in balance, you don't overpopulate. You don't underpopulate. Everything is just fine. It's only when you get out of balance that you overpopulate. And once you overpopulate, then rational mind kicks in. You see where I'm going with this? And so, in order for rational mind to no longer be the case, you have to die back into proper proportion. It's all hand in hand. And I think that is solid, and that is something that we have learned, or at least that I have learned, here in the final few episodes. And it's interesting because I know, at least one person on our message board said this whole, thing about rational hierarchical mind is just, we're all just sniffing our own farts here. And once again, the unsatisfactory answer for that person is the reason you don't get what we're saying is because you're embedded in that rational mind. And so, it's another language to you. And that, to say that out loud, of course, sounds like you're saying, well, I'm better than you, or there's some, but it's not that. It's, or that it's a cop-out answer, something, well, because how could I not understand? I'm so smart. But it's not about intellect. It's about transcendental knowledge, or just sort of seeing the bigger picture, stepping outside and looking at it and going, what's really going on here? So I hope that's an aha moment for everybody, as Oprah would say, or a teachable moment, as Obama would say. And I think it took me a while to get to this because I was just trapped in terminology myself, like when, Teokas and Ghost Horse comes on and talks about indigenous mind or indigenous heart. I've always thought of indigenous meaning tribal. So it's kind of like, well, he's talking about the Lakota, and he's talking about this tribal mindset, and maybe he's trying to sell us something that they actually aren't, because look at our history books telling us what these bad Indians did, or these noble savages, or these dumb whatever. I mean, it's all of this other side to indigenous Americans or indigenous Turtle Islanders is completely missing from anything. I mean, you get a sense of it from some Howard Zinn stuff, Soldiers' Diaries, where they're talking about how kind and caring these people are and how free they are. But essentially, their perspective is missing from the dialogue of American history. And isn't the whole thing of America kind of ironic? It's like you've got these peoples all living on this plot of land here who are free. And then come the Europeans trying to escape the tyranny of taxes in the church, and they set up a country based on doctrines of freedom by killing out the people who live there who are already free to begin with. I think that really actually gets to the heart of the issue, which is that we kill freedom and then we supplant it with this false sense of freedom. You kill natural sense of morality and moral compass to instill religious moral compass, which is repression. And that doctrine of freedom is also repression. Now, in the world of repression, in the world of rational hierarchy, of course, the doctrine of freedom is going to be better than the doctrine of tyranny or dictatorships or, that sort of thing. Of course. But what I'm saying is that entire structure in which all of those things play need not exist. And that's not an ideal, that's indigenous. So when we talk about enlightenment, I think we're not talking about evolving so much as we're talking about recontextualizing ourselves properly. And for us Westerners to do that, it requires a death of self. I don't know whether or not that's required for indigenous people. I just don't know, because I'm not one. The self dies, it gets recontextualized properly, and then resurrects as the face of truth. Truth, the sort of self-awareness of oneness, plays out in separation, plays out in separate organisms. I mean, oneness is these separate organisms. Oneness is everything. Everything adds up to oneness, but the self-awareness aspect of that can only play out through humans, at least on this planet, as far as we know. And that self-awareness aspect plays out, at least initially, as truth, which appears in our brains as insights into the world, into ourselves. And there are things beyond that, of course, but that's the initial thing, and I think that's something that we can latch onto, and so let's not get ahead of ourselves here. But I guess I should make it clear that when I say the self-awareness of oneness, it can only play out through humans as far as we know, I'm not talking about self-awareness, period, because I know people say, well, what about dolphins? What about certain mammals or animals? And I'm not talking about just self-awareness. I'm talking about the full force of the all, of consciousness. That's something that is unique to us as far as we know. And so that's beyond self-recognition and compassion and recognizing another person. It's a lot deeper mind. We have deeper mind, clearly. So that's that. I find all of that fascinating. Now, when I listen to this interview with Barbara Threecrow, and she talks about the Aluna, I find all of that fascinating. That seems real to me. When, the Kogi spend their entire lives, or at least the Mamas do, in what I will loosely call meditation. I mean, it certainly is beyond what we consider meditation when you stick a kid in a home or a cave for the first 9 years of their life and only describe the outside world to them so that they build up themselves in a way completely foreign to anything that we know. I think that when they talk about the Aluna, and they say that there were sort of teacher beings in there that are no longer there anymore, or they're few and far between, and that worries them, that seems real to me. That seems about right on time here, doesn't it? So I think there are entire aspects of ourselves, obviously, and our surroundings that we Westerners simply don't understand, and we call it mythology, or we call it antiquated cultural overlay, and maybe there's some of that going on, but ultimately I think at the heart of it, there is something that we're missing that these folks are not, and that they completely could get us. They could understand what we're saying. I mean, they could learn math and science and all that, because I think there's always this sort of the lie that we tell ourselves, which is like, if you were to, well, let's put it this way: there were a tribe of people living in a thickly forested area, and I don't remember where. Let's say the Amazon. I'm probably wrong, but let's say the Amazon, that were just discovered, and they couldn't see but a few feet in front of their faces. So that was their visual perspective didn't go beyond that, because they lived in densely forested areas, and so their eyes were accustomed to the sort of claustrophobic aspect of nature. And when the anthropologist took their leader up on a mountain, he freaked out. He saw people below, and he thought that they were tiny ant-like people, because he didn't have the perspective of, oh, those are people down there, and he freaked out and all that. Now, of course, that's the freak out of a new perspective, but that's something that you can explain to that person, and they will then incorporate and go, oh, okay, I get it. I mean, all it takes is to then walk down the mountain and meet those people, So I think even if there's a sort of a culture shock or a perspective shock that happens when some indigenous folks, at least, come into contact with our perspective, at the end of the day, they can understand it. All it takes is a walk down the mountain or an explanation, because they do have a rational component to them that is fully functioning. On the other hand, the stuff that they know is not stuff that we can understand unless we live it. And once again, doesn't this get into doctrine versus innate sense? Or all of our societies are built on, things written on paper, facsimiles of the things that we should be. And then the things that we should be, we put outside ourselves and say, that's an ideal. Oh, that's Jesus. That's Buddha. That's not something we can achieve. That's just something that we should aspire to. But then people who are quote-unquote natural don't aspire to those things. They don't have to write them down on paper. They don't have to constantly remind themselves. They don't have to set up tribunals and the such, because they are it. So why aren't we it? Well, we aren't. That's always been my question, right, in the show. Why aren't we that? Well, we aren't that, as it turns out, because we're overpopulated, and because that can't exist here. This must go away for that to be the case. Now, will it? I don't know. But I think that you only know that this isn't evolution, that we're not evolving toward anything, once it is taken away from you, once the house of cards falls, once the grid goes down. And it's interesting, I wonder, I just now am looking at these little things that we do that could be missteps, Concrete was building roads. I mean, was the payoff worth it to be able to drive a car from point A to point B? Was that worth cutting our feet off from the earth and separating ourselves and starting this other mechanism of, you get what I'm saying. I don't need to belabor the point. So that's my takeaway. And I think if there are other beings living in the Aluna or alongside us or all around us, and they are invisible to us because we block them out with this structure, or it takes a special skill set to perceive them properly, a skill set that is not acquirable or teachable through rational means as anything other than theoretical, well, one, they are going to look like an enemy, aren't they? If they try to approach us. Or if they're just sort of like ghosts or things that we don't understand that don't seem to be really approaching us but just sort of exist. I mean, if those things are real, they're going to look scary. They're going to look like a curiosity. Always. Like, we'll never figure them out. Because to figure them out is to figure ourselves out alongside it. And to do that is to destroy rational Western mind. We don't want to do that. We want to collapse everything down inside of our box, of our perspective. Because we like our perspective, we think. Because here we are. Except that we don't really like our perspective, do we? We just kind of like keep fucking up and saying, well, that's human nature. But I'm not convinced that it is. Now, here's where my prejudices come in. When Barbara Threecrow starts talking about herself, I mean, it's all well and good when I hear about the Kogi or the Lakota, going into the Aluna or, being downloaded with information or whatever, any of those sorts of things that we otherwise, or I'll say I, otherwise consider New Age. When I hear it coming from them, it's fine. Oh, that's who they are. When I hear it coming from Barbara Threecrow, who looks and speaks a lot like me, I am skeptical, because that's just where I go. That's my prejudice. And that's not a reflection on her, that's a reflection on me, isn't it? Because when I hear, I hold this rock or this crystal and I concentrate my attention on it, on what I want while I'm holding it, and then I have this sort of dreamscape about it. Well, I mean, is that any different than just going to bed and saying 10 times, I want to dream about this, and then your brain dreams about it? After a couple of days of doing that, maybe your brain finally picks up on it and dreams about it. How is that any different than that? Now, that said, what I just said, maybe it is the same thing, and I'm missing the point that, oh my God, you can concentrate on something, and then within a few days of doing that, you will pull out of the ether information regarding that, regarding your concern. So maybe that is more amazing, and I really appreciate the fact that she gave us sort of a step-by-step instruction of what she does, so that we can all do it. And will it just end up being dream material? I don't know. The thing that makes me question my own prejudices here is that she states, I know the difference between this and a dream. This is not a dream. And I certainly in my own life have experienced that. So who am I to not take her at her word? So I'm going to take her at her word. Whether or not that's the same thing that the Kogi experience as the Aluna, of course, I can't know. But I certainly am not going to sit here and invalidate her experiences simply because I have a prejudice. Because really, what's my prejudice? My prejudice with the New Age isn't about that what they're saying isn't possible. It's that it's not grounded in anything. And here she has grounded it in an explanation and said, look, you can do this, and you will achieve this. That's an explanation. That's what my Western hierarchical mind demands. So that's not like just, I had an out-of-body experience and all of this happened, and I go out of my body every night, and I float over a golden city, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, all that sort of stuff I have no use for, because there's no way to prove it, and usually the person saying something like that strikes me as a repressed abuse victim, or something, repressing something, and that this is their happy place. I mean, I've dealt with enough New Age people to know that much. And here's where there becomes a problem for someone like Tiokasin, which is, I think if I were to say, yeah, I went out of my body and I floated over City of Light and blah, 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 he wouldn't be looking for the psychological cues in me necessarily that tell him that I'm screwed up. He would take me at my word because he experiences stuff like that, or he has heard stuff like that, or he doesn't have judgments in Lakota. They don't have better than, worse than. They have incorporating new information. And that's probably a horrible way to put that for the Lakota, incorporating new information. But, forgive me my language barrier. So, I think he would not be as discriminating, perhaps, about somebody telling him something like that, because it's not in him to be. Because in indigenous heart, who's going to mess with you? I mean, when you're in balance, there's no lying. You see? And so why would you lie? Why would you lie about it? It just wouldn't even occur. But we do lie, because we're rational, Western, hierarchical, blah, blah, blah. And I think maybe that was the whole problem of when we came over here in the first place. And it was like, there was probably no sense that someone would come over on a boat and dominate you and try to kill you off or enslave you or steal your gold or any of that sort of stuff. I bet that wasn't even in the cards, So, I mean, this gets to a whole other situation of like, well, if these people are so smart, then why didn't they see it coming? Or why didn't they do anything about it? Why are they, it's always the loser in the battle who claims empowerment in some other way because they were actually disempowered. No. That's all because we don't understand that it's not in their language that somebody would come over and be the devil. That's in our language. And we brought our language with us. And That's what happened. I mean, I really think that's what happened. It's open heart meets closed mind, and we call them naive, stupid animals and then kill them. And somehow we're the good guys because we've got doctrine on our side. But really, they were the good guys all along. And it's not that we're bad guys, it's that we're ignorant. We're little brother. We don't know what our true face is. We don't know that indigenous means enlightenment, and that enlightenment doesn't mean evolution or transcending to something higher necessarily, but just giving up the self and dying back into proper proportion and health. So I hope these words are making sense, and I'm now going to leave the topic for other things. Let's see. We got a letter here. Letters, we got... The subject line is Your Skeptical Fans, and it says, hello. Pardon the airplane. I don't know if you hear that outside my window, but now there's a giant airplane going by. It says, hello. I've been enjoying your podcast for several months now. After listening to your George Hansen show, however, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that Paratopia, like all paranormal podcasts, has fans in the skeptical community. I say, quote-unquote, fans because we do not listen with a, quote-unquote, know thy enemy mentality, but because we genuinely enjoy hearing the about... Okay, spelling error here. Because we genuinely enjoy hearing about ideas and experiences of people with a different worldview than our own. As you may expect, I thought your characterization of the skeptical community was unfair. In your coverage of the Emma Woods scandal and your critique of hypnotically recovered memories, you took a very skeptical point of view. I think that it is fair to assume that in doing so, you were not motivated by a psychological need to appear like the smartest person in the room or by a desire to suppress David Jacobs' research because it challenges your paradigm. The same is true of most skeptics. Most of us are science buffs who are acting upon a desire to promote science in critical thinking. Where we really feel the need to go on the offensive is where we see predatory and manipulative people like David Jacobs causing real harm. For example, quack doctors who con the terminally ill out of their money in exchange for useless treatments. We see promoting science education and critical thinking as a way to do that. Far from being threatened by the possibility of the supernatural, I would like nothing more than to believe that there is a spirit world, or that there are beings from another dimension visiting us. The reality is simply that none of the evidence I've seen so far has been sufficient to convince me. That having been said, I have no trouble believing that intelligent, educated, sane people such as you could draw a different conclusion. For you to generalize that skeptics are pompous know-it-alls who seek to suppress what they cannot explain is no less arrogant / closed. Close. Arrogant, close. Well, I'm sure he meant closed. Well, skeptical fan, first of all, thank you for being a skeptical fan. I have a neighbor who reads the Skeptical Inquirer and doesn't believe anything that comes out of my mouth about UFOs or any of that. We're really good friends. And so, obviously I understand that there are skeptics that are just fine. What we were talking about is really more, organizational debunkers who... I don't think that you can make the case that there are not people who just go on TV to present another side that is unlearned. They go on TV and they haven't even touched, as George Hansen said, a book on the subject. It's just saying no to say no to preserve the status quo, that everything is just okay the way it is and will be answered by science. I mean, that does exist, and that is the organizational part of it. The other part of it, and let's call it debunking, if you want to just say, okay, we're not really talking about anyone with skeptical minds. Clearly, you're not in that category of people, right? But there's also the other piece of it that is these people on message boards. I've been to skeptical message boards, and I've tried to interact with people, and as soon as they find out who I am or sort of what my take on this stuff is, I immediately get trashed and trashed and trashed by person after person. They take great glee in doing it. So that's been my experience. Now, yeah, of course, we mentioned on the show Derek Bartholomew is, quote-unquote, one of the good ones. And my neighbor I would consider one of the good ones. There are people you can have a discussion with about it who are open and honest, and I think that if you were to present them with something conclusively other, they would see it, they would recognize it, and they would change their stance. And then I think there are people who will not, and they're not even looking for it. Like what you're talking about is that you're looking for some truth here, and you haven't found it in what you're seeing with this stuff, but you're still willing to look. I don't think that's true of these organizations. I don't think Amazing Randy wants that. I don't think, Dr. Sky or whatever, Dr. Sky Medicine Woman, whatever his name is, wants that. And that's clear by what they say and their actions. And so who is it that funds them? Well, it's humanists. It's secular humanism is the funding mechanism behind that. And secular humanism is a belief system. The belief that science will solve everything, materialism, nothing to see here. That's a belief system. So I do think that we tell the difference. It's just like when Jeff says, I don't like science, and then people say, well, what do you mean by that? I mean, he's not literally saying there's nothing in science here that... It's the mindset. It's the mindset of this is going to be right, and this is going to prove out everything in a way that is logical and rational and, makes complete sense along our lines as we are right now. I think that mindset is completely off base and arrogant and can't know it. Again, this gets right back into what we were just talking about. Can't know it until it dies. And it either dies physically and you find out, or it dies unto itself while the body remains alive and the entire being goes back into balance. I think that's that's my perspective. I won't say that's Jeff's perspective, but I secretly think it is. I think when Jeff, and I'm sure you're listening to this, when you say, like, I don't get what these people are saying. Like, he didn't want to... The Peter Kingsley interview he wanted to listen to as we were doing it for the finale, but he didn't want to take part in it necessarily because he feels like it's beyond him. And I think that is complete bullshit. And I think anyone who's listened to this show, I think if you really listen to what Jeff's saying, we don't disagree as much as he says we do. It's just that he needs to, like most people, like I do, need to hear it and mull it over and incorporate it into themselves to put it into their own words, But I think he does have the same innate gifts that anyone else does, and I don't buy for a second that he can't hold his own in a conversation with anyone on human consciousness. But I think, Jeff, that you like to retreat into this lie you tell yourself of, that's not for me, I don't get it, because, you want to take your time and sort of incrementally get there on your own, or else it's not real for you, which I think is true for all of us, right? Except that I just think with me, like, I just saw it immediately, and when I say immediately, I mean it took me a while to get to that immediate point, but once you get there, it's like you rest, and you go, oh, exhale. And then something new happens. But that something new happens requires letting go, and that's the thing that most of us don't want to do, because letting go means letting go of all of this. And then what happens then? What happens when you let go of the rational hierarchical structure and you still live in it, because that's what your society is and that's what your world is? It ain't pretty, but I think we're all inevitably getting there one way or another. That's way off base, and I'm sorry I just rambled. But Jeff, perhaps I had a message for you, Jeff, from on high. No, I'm kidding about that. I should say that our finale will be a panel discussion now with listeners of the show once again, and then Jeff and I will do our final wrap chat. And I think that this is actually more apropos because, of course, the second incarnation of Paratopia will be user content. So, user-generated content. And we now have at least, I would say, over a month's worth of shows, either in production or produced. So that's coming along nicely, and I hope more people start to contribute. And I think once you start hearing it, you're going to want to contribute, but I hope you do it before, do it ahead of time so that I can edit all this stuff. And all I need to do is press a button on Fridays, because I'll have it all done, and then I can have some freedom during my weeks. That would be great for me, because otherwise this is going to be yet another monumental project, and, I'm sure just because we're going away primarily on the public front, that's not going to stop people from shooting slings and arrows at us, and that stuff does bug me to some degree, and just who needs the headache anymore? So the best way for me to stay away is to be able to edit a whole bunch of shows up front and then not have to even pay attention to that stuff. And I know I don't have to pay attention to that stuff, but I'm weak, and so I do pay attention to that stuff. But not if I'm not on my computer all the time. See how that works? Now, one final note. We have switched from Podbean to CyberEars, cyberears.com, and we're having a problem switching over the iTunes feed and all that stuff. So just be aware that on your end, you may need to switch over to www.cyberears.com to listen to our show. Maybe not. Maybe we'll get this all worked out in the next week or so. But just in case, there you go. All right, Paratopia. We will see you at the 70th and final episode of this incarnation next Friday. For Jeffrey Ritzman, I'm Jeremy Vaeni. Thank you and good night. And thank Barbara Threecrow as well. And good night.